Montenegro, as we know it, officially came into existence in 1516, when it formed as a prince-bishopric. Now, while small, they managed to fend off numerous Turkic invasions, at worst being forced to pay tribute to the Ottomans. Multiple times, the small state miraculously defended itself from tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers, greatly helped by their defensive mountainous terrain. While the Ottomans successfully subjugated kingdoms as great as Hungary, small Montenegro held on. Yet, sadly, in terms of a perfect Montenegro, we do have to wait centuries before we can truly start their rise. If we're being honest, them maintaining independence is already impressive enough. Even if we give Montenegro an absolutely Napoleon-tier leader in the 1600s, seizing for himself a neat little principality, all we are doing is making them an even bigger target for the Turks, and spreading their resources out even thinner. Even in a perfect video, we can't just give them Alexander the Great tier leaders for 2 whole centuries. Somewhat counterintuitively, if we strengthen Montenegro too early, I believe we risk the Ottomans actually being more successful against it. Therefore, I would argue that, aside from minor expansion, it would be best to start a timeline relatively late, at least in the 1700s. By that point, the Ottomans were in clear decline, the Austrians having reconquered Hungary, while the Russians are actively pushing towards the Balkan. In this environment, the Montenegrins might have some room for greater expansion, and as reliable allies to beat on the Turks with. Now specifically, I would like to start around 1766. During this time, a very peculiar thing happened. Montenegro, traditionally a prince-bishopric ruled by an Orthodox metropolitan, was visited by a strange man, known as Scepan Mali, and a rumor began to spread that he was the late Peter III, the Russian Tsar who supposedly died 4 years earlier. This rumor became so intense, and Scepan so popular, that they sidelined their prince-bishop and let Scepan take charge of the state, uniting the Montenegrin tribes under his rule. Even more, he was actually an extremely competent leader, modernizing the army and government of the state while implementing religious, social, and judicial reforms. On the other side of Europe though, Catherine the Great, the widow of the late Peter III, was quite upset about her husband's impostor in Montenegro, as were the Ottomans, who feared that the state could now align closer to Russia. The Ottomans would once more launch a failed invasion of the state, while the Russians sent an emissary who exposed Scepan for not actually being Peter, deposing and even detaining him. Yet, the Russians would then realize that Scepan was actually the best contender for ruling the state, and despite his reputation having suffered, he continued to have broad support, especially now that he had the favor of the Russian monarchs, who as leaders of the Orthodox world held a lot of sway in the region. Yet misfortune would strike as he was crippled by a landmine while he was demonstrating it for his troops, which forced him to spend the rest of his reign infirm, carried around in a sedan chair. Yet still, he continued his modernizations, until 1773, when the Ottoman governor of Albania successfully orchestrated an assassination, ending the brief but impactful 5-year reign of Scepan Mali. Yet, he was only 34 at the time of his death. It is far from crazy to suggest that he doesn't almost blow himself up and isn't assassinated, therefore being able to continue his reign, laying the foundation for our perfect Montenegro, especially as he reigned during arguably the best period for Montenegrin expansion. Again, the Ottomans were in marked decline, and most notably were at war with Russia during this period, mostly about their Black Sea holdings, but Catherine had great ambitions, not just on the Danubian principalities, but even bigger plans for her grandson, Constantine. If she got her way, the Russian Empire would create a new Greco-Bulgarian Byzantine Empire in the Balkan. Now this war, and the Russian ambitions within them, were the reason that they were so interested in the small Montenegrin state, as they hoped that they could recruit them as an ally, in some way destabilizing the Western Balkan in the process. Yet nothing came of these plans. Scepan did prepare for a military campaign, but never actually launched it. Why is difficult to say. Maybe due to his injuries, maybe because the Russians failed to provide the aid that they promised. Yet, if we assume a moderately stronger Montenegro, a healthy Scepan, and Russian aid actually arriving, could the plan be successful? Could Scepan launch a simultaneous invasion of neighboring territories, further expanding the state, setting it up for greatness? I'm sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with all the latest releases, consider doing so. Thank you. Now, considering that this is a perfect video, if we really wanted to, we could imagine the Russians completely wiping the floor with the Ottomans, marching down to Constantinople and having the Ottomans at their mercy completely. Yet, there are a couple of reasons why I won't. First, it is rather unlikely. It is truly a journey for the Russians to march all the way to the city, and even if they could, you might imagine the other great powers having something to say about it. Secondly then, it is also such a fascinating concept that it would distract from what we really want to see, Montenegro, and would probably deserve its own video one day. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I don't think a Russian victory here would even benefit the Montenegrins that much, as in order to keep Austria happy, Russia had planned to compensate them with all of this, putting Montenegro in a very uncomfortable situation going forwards. So, we're going to tune down the Russian victory a bit, but it is still significant, and we could imagine that as a result, the Montenegrins make some gains as well, while ensuring that they keep their defensive advantage by mostly seizing mountains. More notably, they have now proven themselves to be a useful Russian asset, which, in a best case scenario, could result in further aid and troops, which is going to prove important as we get to the Napoleonic Wars. Scepan could now take advantage of the chaos of the time, most notably through the conflicts happening over Italy. As the French and Austrians partition Venice, their Balkan territories will also be up for grabs, and they did hold some holdings near Montenegro. Supported by the Russians, they might now manage to reach themselves an independent port, making further Russian reinforcements easier to maintain. Even more, in our timeline, Napoleon got an interest in the city-state of Ragusa, and competed with Russia and Montenegro over the city. In our timeline, the French were victorious, but it might be possible that under Scepan's reign, with Russian support, Montenegro could capture the small state, further adding to his power. Then, near the final decade of the Napoleonic Wars, Scepan, now in his 60s, would pass away. Yet across his long reign, he has set up Montenegro in a pretty great position, assuming to get to keep the Republic of Ragusa during the Congress of Vienna, which is not guaranteed due to Austrian pressure, but also not crazy due to Russian support. Even more, during this time, Russia will once more have waged war against the Turks, and it is likely that Montenegro once more expands their borders as a result, solidifying themselves as a true force in the Western Balkan, while rule over the port of Ragusa increases their economic might. Now, my hope is that all of this is in service of a major change post-war. I hope that through the buffs we have given Montenegro, Orthodox Serb nationalism in the post-Napoleon world will center around the princedom of Montenegro. This is not an all too crazy notion. Even in our timeline, the Montenegrins had significant expansionist dreams, supporting revolts in Bosnia and other Serb territories. It is truly not impossible that we have butterflied away Serbia, as the people of the region instead rally around the Montenegrin flag. From here though, specifics do get difficult, but as the Ottoman Empire enters decline, Montenegro is in a far better position than they were historically. So now, I see two broad conclusions to this timeline. In one, a different Serb state might still form nonetheless, which then goes on to compete with Montenegro over remaining territories. In the other, Serbia truly never forms, leaving only Montenegro. In either case though, it is difficult to continue this scenario in detail. We have changed enough that the specific history of the Balkan will be completely butterflied away. But we have changed too little for me to analyze exactly how it has changed. So instead, we will conclude with some broad notes. Now, in the best case scenario, Montenegro might try to secure Bosnia, a region they were long focused on. Realistically though, the Austrians will never allow it in the short term. Montenegro instead expands towards the edges, but unlike Serbia, might focus more on seizing the northern Albanian coastline, a goal held by both the Montenegrins and Serbians of our timeline. This could set up for a Montenegro more focused on the west and the coast, plausibly even resulting in an alternate state which doesn't focus on expansion into Macedonia, perhaps even opening the door to Bulgaria and Montenegro being closer allies, unlike Serbia and Bulgaria in our timeline. Then alternatively, despite our changes, a separate Serbian state might still develop. This is obviously less ideal for Montenegro, but due to their overall stronger position, could still change the Serbia-Montenegrin dynamic, in a best case leading to a different unification, in which Montenegro maintains part of their autonomy within a growing Southern Slavic state, improving their position come the formation of a Yugoslavia. This was actually the strategy utilized by the kings of Montenegro before our timeline's World War I. The people were calling for full unification with Serbia, but the king attempted to negotiate a unification which kept his position intact, and they even hoped to use World War I to expand, increasing their leverage for this unification. Essentially, we might have achieved something similar in this alternate timeline. In any case, the future of Montenegro now largely depends on great power politics, mostly depending on if and when Austria-Hungary collapses, and Russian opinions on the alternate Balkan situation. As for my personal headcanon ending, Montenegro achieved some victory in World War I, allied with their Slavic brethren in Bulgaria, establishing a Montenegrin Yugoslavia as the dominant power in the region. For now though, this is the end of the video. Thank you all for watching, and consider leaving a like and a comment as well as subscribing. If you've enjoyed this video, click the video on top to watch another in this series. If you've already seen it, I'm sure the bottom video is great too. Once again, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.